of William Wordsworth and Coleridge as critics of high repute. Then we can jump to the next critic, and that is Sainte-Beuve. Sainte-Beuve, the name tells us that he also contributed in a very different way to the field of literary criticism, and his works, portraits and causeries, where we find out his views on the duties of a critic. He is of the opinion that a critic must read the biography of a literary writer. Then only he can criticize a work of art in a proper way. He says that this method must be scientific. When we judge a work of art, we must actually know in advance the real nature, character, and personality of that writer. It means that if we want to criticize or evaluate Hamlet, the great tragedy written by William Shakespeare, then first of all, we must go through the biography of William Shakespeare. Then only we can understand why Prince Hamlet behaves like this, or why he suffers this type of madness, and why does he take these steps. So, in short, if we know the nature about the education or about the environment, family background, friends, relatives, society, the institutions in which that writer studied. So if we know all these things, then only we can judge that writer's work of art in a proper way. Because then only we can understand his psyche or mentality, his thought process, and his style of writing. Yes. At one place, Sainte-Beuve says, when we know the tree, we know the fruit. Naturally, this is obvious, because if we know the tree, that this is the tree of mango, then naturally we know the fruit, that yes, this is the fruit of mango. So if we know Shakespeare, then naturally we come to know about so many things, or rather the various aspects of the personality of Prince Hamlet. And of course, through which we come to know about the style of William Shakespeare, how he writes or why he writes in that way. And we come to know about his philosophy, that why he presents this type of thought or philosophy in this great tragedy. Yes. Our next critic is Matthew Arnold. And as you know, he belonged to the age of Queen Victoria, means Victorian age. In Victorian age, you know that there are many factors, and you have already studied, so you also know that why these critics are thinking in that way. So Arnold and Ruskin especially, they have different personalities as critics. And here we find out that Matthew Arnold has expressed his critical views in his essays, and especially his essay in criticism that has become very famous, in which we find out his views for poetry, for the function of poetry, for the duties of an ideal critic. And of course, we know that Matthew Arnold was a lawgiver, just like Aristotle. He has described in detail the duties of a critic. His critic has a very, very serious duty to society or duty to the public, because he was also, like we can say, Aristotle, type of a person who thinks a lot about society. Actually, he can be compared with Plato, because he thinks a lot about the moral aspect of literature and how to criticize a work of art in that perspective. Yes, his critic is a propagandist of best ideas, because he says that a critic must be careful enough to spread those ideas which are the best ideas, because these ideas will have a very serious impact on society. He also discusses in detail about the element or aspect of disinterestedness. Yes, this is objectivity. A critic must be impartial in his expression of views when he judges a work of art. He also talks about high seriousness. Um, when we talk about the function of Arnold's critic, he says that the duty of a critic is to promote culture. Yes, he emphasizes too much on this point, and he says that this is the duty of a critic, to promote culture. Then only the people or the readers will come to know about the best ideas. This is his duty, that he has to prevail best ideas in society. Yes. He also talks about the touchstone theory. You already know when we had talked about Homer and Hesiod. He tells that when we read the great works of the Greek writers, then only we come to know about the grand style and that grandeur of thought. And we must imitate those words or sentences or paragraphs. And by imitating, we can also make our ordinary work extraordinary. And so this is the type of touchstone theory where he tells us to read the past great works. Yes. Then he talks in detail about the three types of estimates. He says that estimates of literature are of three types. Number one is the historic estimate, number two is the personal estimate, and number three is the real estimate. I am not going to tell you in detail about these things, but I would definitely tell you that he believes that the real type of estimate is the true estimate, and the ideal critic must follow this aspect of the explaining things. When he criticizes a work of art, he must be in favor of the real estimate. What is reality, what is truth, must be exposed and illuminated to the readers. Then Ruskin, yes, this is the next literary critic. Ruskin also belonged to the Victorian age, and his views are found in his work, The Poetry of Architecture. Yes, and his essays are also there, where we find out that how he thinks about the criticism, duties of an ideal critic, and the function and nature of poetry. So Ruskin views are very famous when he talks about art and morality. He was a great moralist, as we know that he is just like Plato. He believes in art for life's sake. He says that a work of art must be didactic. It must teach something to the readers. Otherwise, there is no use of creating a work of art. But here he differs from Plato, and he says that the element of beautiful is a gift of God. Plato said that just because of this gift of God, poets must be banished from the ideal state. But here, Arnold favors this point, and he says that the element of beauty must be there. Then only a work of art is a work of art. And it is really a gift of God. It must be appreciated. Yes, then he points out about imagination. Three types of imagination are there according to Ruskin. And he says that imagination associative, yes, that associates different things. Number two is imagination contemplative. Yes, that forces you to contemplate about various things. And then the third one is imagination penetrative. Yes, it penetrates directly through the ultimate, to the ultimate reality. And the real truth you come to know just with the help of this type of imagination that is known as the penetrative imagination. According to Ruskin, it is the main function of a poet to teach something, to give moral lessons of life to the readers. But Scott James here tells us very frankly that the real business of the moralist is to teach. This is not the duty of an artist to teach, because if artist starts to teach, then what the moralist will do? And so different duties are actually given to different artists, different types of, you can say, um, um, the type of didactic teachers, they also have their own duties, but a literary critic must perform his duty, and that is to explain that work of art in a very proper way. But the business of the artist, according to Ruskin, is to show how life looks like. He has to show the reality, because he says that life ought to be like that. That is the main point of a moralist. This is not the point dealing with an artist. An artist only has to communicate, he has to show, he has to exhibit what life looks like. Yes, so when we talk about Ruskin, we are very much clear that, like Plato, he is a great moralist, and he is in favor of art for life's sake. Okay, now we can jump to our next topic in our syllabus, that is Walter Pater. Walter Pater was also a great critic, literary critic, and his essay on style has become very famous, where he tells in detail about style. What are the different aspects of style? And it was Walter Pater who gave us this famous line, "Style is the man." Yes, girls, do you know Amitabh Bachchan? And how can you make out that he is Amitabh Bachchan? If the shadow is there, yes, it is just because of his style of speaking, his style of walking, his style of talking to the people. Yeah, so this is how a creative artist is also known, just because of his style. Style means manner of writing, how that writer or poet writes. And here manner includes so many things. He talks in detail about the choice of words. He says that the manner of writing represents an approach to life, how that artist thinks. So a critic must be careful when he criticizes a work of art. He must watch the style of that creative artist. He says that style is actually an external thing, but it is not so. It is not always so, because style is actually, if we perceive it from the real sense of the term, it is an internal element. It is the incarnation of thought, as Carlyle also has explained us. Now I would like to tell you about Ben Jonson also, because he also tells us about words and sense. He says that words are the external thing, and meaning of those words, that is the internal thing. They are just like the body and soul. Yeah, so the same thing here is explained in detail by Walter Pater. And he gives so much significance to the comeliness, the bleakness, and the graciousness. So these qualities for him are the best qualities of a writer. And in the same way, a critic has to be very attentive to think about the style and the matter of a work of art. He says that we should not forget the content part, but of course the style part is very, very significant. He in detail talks to us about diction, style, form, because all these things suggest mind or the idea or the thought of the writer. Now we must jump to the next critic, as we are running short of time. This is Croce. Yes, Croce was, of course, in my idea, a very different type of literary critic. And you must remember his work, Aesthetic, in which he expresses his ideas on expressionism. Yeah, Walter Pater deals with impressionism, but here we find out that he talks to us about two types of knowledge. He says that there is intuitive knowledge, and of course we do find out the type of logical knowledge also. Then he talks in detail about art. He contrasts intuition with impression and sensation. He tells that first of all, we, means the creative writers, observe what is just before them, and then they create so many impressions in their mind. Then they are turned to sensations, and then they try to find out expression of those emotions and imagination, sensation and impression, and they create a type of work of art in their mind. So these creative writers, when they create a very good artistic work in their mind, that is the pure work of art, according to Croce. He says that the real work of art exists only in the mind of the writer. So this is something new for us, and we have discussed in detail that he believes that art is nothing but intuition. For him, intuition is everything. And in detail, he tells that when that art lies in mind, actually the artist has created ideas, impressions, sensations, and then he tries to express. But that expression must be a mental process. It must not be externalized. He says that if that becomes an external work of art, then it is no longer a work of art. It is, means art, a work of art is always internal, and that which is called external, that is no longer a work of art. It is very strange. Students, you understand that when a work of art exists in mind, then how can a critic criticize that work of art? How can we know? If Jananini Jod is not written, then how can we appreciate that poem, right? So this is how he says that a work of art is always internal, but here he gloriously adds, I would like to add a few phrases of words here, which are written by Scott James. Scott James writes that for Croce, spoken or written words, painted pictures, carved statues are merely, in double inverted commas, aids to memory, and they are just physical stimulants, nothing else. So this is very much strange, but okay. Scott James also tells us the truth, that how to judge such an internal work, that is the problem for a critic. If Croce is our guide, Croce's poet speaks no language, and actually art implies language. Scott James tells us in a detailed way that every artist requires communication, and for communication he takes the weapon of language or means of language. Language becomes the vehicle through which we come to know about the artistic process that is going on in the mind of that literary artist. And he says that the duty of an artist is to communicate, it is to show. But Croce denies that. It seems that Croce has left out life. He has forgotten the element of beauty. Okay, overall, we have tried to understand the contribution of all these critics, and we now know also, after this revision, that all these critics have talked in detail about the nature of poetry, the function of poetry, the use of language, the choice of words, whether there should be the use of meter or not, how to use the words, in what way, how to present those works before the readers. So as a critic, every literary critic who is in our syllabus has tried his level best to explain that a real critic must become a very good link between the writer and the reader, between the inspired and the uninspired. So overall, this is the fantastic duty of the ideal critics. So we have in that way gone through Wordsworth, Coleridge, Ruskin, Matthew Arnold, Croce, Sainte-Beuve, Walter Pater, and now girls, this presentation is over, but if you have any queries or doubt, please ask me, feel free, and without any hesitation, you can put your questions before me. Thank you very much. Yes, I would like to thank our principal, Dr. Nagar sir, then our most knowledgeable personality in technology, Dhaval Bhai Rajyaguru, then my dear student Urvi Modha and Ami Padhyar, because they have helped me a lot. This is my first experiment. Online teaching is a new thing for me, but just because of their help, I could successfully present this presentation before you. I hope that you have understood these points, and these points will become useful in your examination. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, madam. It was indeed a beautiful session. And madam has started with literature. What is literature? She gave the definition of literature and what is literary criticism. She started with Plato, Aristotle, Longinus, and then jumped to Matthew Arnold and Dryden, and then we had Ruskin and Croce. So it was a beautiful session. I have a question, madam. I don't know about the students, but I want to know a little bit more about the Coleridge primary and secondary imagination. If you can elaborate that.
Yes, here Coleridge. Yes, here Coleridge elaborately tells us that both the imagination are very much same in nature, but in degree they differ. One is superior to other. Primary imagination is possessed by all of us. We are the ordinary people. We are not poets, but secondary imagination, degree-wise, that is so much having impact, and that's why it is possessed only by the great poets. So it's a matter of degree. It has that power to dissolve your ideas, to diffuse, and to dissipate. And in that way, they create something new. And in that way, this type of power of imagination, means the secondary imagination, recreates something new. So it gives you altogether something new. See, the idea of Paradise Lost, where we find out Milton wants to tell us about the act of man, Adam and Eve, but he represents before us that idea in such a way we cannot do that. Suppose we think we cannot do that, but this is the power of secondary imagination, and as it is possessed by Milton, he is successful. He successfully does that thing, and he communicates in a very good way. So this is the power of secondary imagination, and this is how the secondary imagination differs from the primary imagination. I tell the girls many times that write a poem on Janani or Ma. Suppose we start writing that poem, we shall write down that Mummy, tu to ajod che, Mummy, tu to am che, tem che. But this is the power of that poet who gives us words like this. Janani ni jod saki nahi jade lo. So in that way, if you read that poem, you shall feel that, oh my God, how these words are used, and only that poet can use such words. So this is the skill, or rather genius, not even skill. Skill is very much different, but this is the genius of that poet who penetrates directly to our heart, and he moves our heart, and we also have the same type of emotion regarding our Janani or mother. Yeah. So that is the secondary imagination differs from the primary imagination.
So, in a way, we can say that the definition given by De Quincey, literature of power and literature of knowledge, the way a poet transforms that words, that becomes the literature of power, and the way we transform our words, that becomes the literature of knowledge only. I guess we can relate that with.
Yes, here, Urvi, your question is very much relevant, because when we go through a long journey, then we find out that in ancient age, the poet was a Veda, he was a seer. People regarded him as a rishi, and it was his duty to preach or teach. Then gradually, as the ages passed by, we find out Aristotle, then Longinus. Longinus tells us that this is the duty to lift up the readers. And then, of course, when we pass through other critics' views, then Sir Philip Sidney says that it must be a delightful teaching. In poetry, we must find out that type of teaching. But he clearly cannot say that delight is the only, if not the chief aim of poesy, as Dryden said. So, as and when we just come nearer to Dryden, we find out that, okay, this is the main aim of poetry, means a work of art, that it not only teaches us, but the main aim of a work of art is to provide aesthetic pleasure. Means age-wise, that tendency goes on changing. At one place, you will find out that writers and critics believe in art for art's sake, and then in the next century, they believe in art for life's sake. So this is how we feel that De Quincey is right in his own way, because he belonged to that particular age. So he could only explain giving these two types of literature, literature of knowledge and literature of power. But afterwards, when we find out Ruskin, then we have Matthew Arnold, then we have Walter Pater, gradually at the end, in the modern times, we also know that this is the main aim of an artist, to provide aesthetic pleasure. So to move, that is the main function of a creative artist. Longinus goes beyond that, to transform, to create ecstasy, to uplift our mind. So that becomes with spiritual poetry, mostly, as I believe.
Thank you so much, madam.
Yes.
Now we can certainly say that criticism is not a cup of tea of everyone, and we cannot indulge into serious criticism without knowing the actual essence of that, because there are many factors which we should know before criticizing anyone or anything. So thank you so much, madam. Before we end the session, I would thank our principal, Dr. Nagar sir, naturally Ketki madam, Bharat sir.
Thank you.
Sir, your presence means a lot to us. Dhaval sir for the technical terms, Abhi madam, and all the students. Some of our alumni have also joined. So thank you so much for joining us. And
do they have questions?
Yes, we can ask them if they have any question. You can raise your hand like this and ask any question. Otherwise, you can just say that the session was absolutely fine. Okay, Aditi has a question.
Yes, Aditi.
Aditi, your mic is not working.
Hello, madam. Now it's okay?
Yeah. Yes, now I can listen to you.
Okay. I want to ask about the real estimate of literature given by Matthew Arnold.
Yes, he has told us about the three types of estimates. And he says that historic estimates, naturally, there we have so many aspects of history. So it may not be right because history always deals with the past. And the personal estimate, where you will find out the likes and dislikes, grudges, prejudices of that you can say literature or a work of literature, and that's why he says that the real estimate is really the real estimate. And in that way, here he tells us that be unbiased, having no prejudices, having not your personal likes and dislikes. Suppose you criticize a work of art in that way, then only you will have a real type of evaluation or judgment of that work of art.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Welcome, most welcome, and wish you all the best. Everybody, hi.